Welcome to On the Brink, a fresh lens to take you and your business to new heights. Hi, I'm Andi Simon, and I'm your host today on this podcast. And I'm so excited to have with me Steve Smith. You should really get to know Steve Smith. He's an exceptional coach, but he's had a wonderful career building up to that, and I'll tell you more about it just briefly. He's president and founder of GrowthSource Coaching in California. He provides leadership, management, and marketing coaching to business owners, executives, and entrepreneurs globally. And as you know, we have a bunch of coaching going on with clients in India and Mexico. And, we're all very small in this world today. We can reach out to anybody. So as you're thinking about the conversation today, think about how it could help you. Consider the Catalyst for Change by the California Business Journal. Steve has helped over 400 business professionals to date. He's an author, a speaker, a podcaster. His book is Leadership Axioms, and it's just been released. He speaks to business groups, trade associations, and he launched his fourth internet radio podcast show called Business Wingman. He can tell you about that. Let me say hi to Steve. Thanks for joining us. I wish you guys could see his face. On the audio, you only hear him, but he has a great smile. So, Steve, thanks for joining us today.
Andrea, thanks for having me. This sounds like it's going to be a lot of fun.
Well, you and I are both very concerned about helping people do better. Yes. And they are always on the brink, hence the title here, of really soaring. Sometimes they just need a little hand. So yes. Let's talk a little bit about Steve Smith. Give them a little bit about your own journey, because it's a little bigger than the part that I'm talking about. So, in snapshot, let them hear who you are, and then we'll get into how we help you change. Please.
I have been coaching for 10 years now, and it was a business that I really didn't see coming. After 30 years in consumer products manufacturing in a lot of different locations, markets, and positions, I got to the point where the travel, which was required in that industry, was just killing me. I was spending most of my week, every single week, at the airport, flying here, there, meeting customers, working with reps, visiting, logistics facilities. And while it was all very dynamic and exciting for a lot of years, eventually it just started to wear on me. And when you live in Southern California, it's one of the most beautiful places in the country. And here I am. I don't know most of my neighbors because I'm not here long enough to meet any of them.
I'm laughing. I did 130,000 miles on an airplane last year. I get it.
Yeah, it's some people it's energizing. For me, it was just kind of sucking the life out of me at a very slow, steady pace. So I offloaded in May of 2008. Quite honestly, just basically was going to look for the same type of work, but more of a regionalized company where the travel just wasn't so much. And so in the process of putting my resumes out on all these different websites, these professional websites, I was on this one called The Ladders, which is a marketing executive website. And, they're free, okay? So you push the submit button. And before that, you have to be mindful of all the free offers for people to talk to you about various things that are already pre-checked, that if you don't want to hear from these folks, you have to go and uncheck everything. Well, I didn't go down far enough. And I left one at the very bottom, kind of under the fold. And so within 2 hours, I get a phone call from a lady who's in Austin, Texas. And she's a consultant, and she helps executives from various industries figure out how to transform themselves into something more entrepreneurial. She was the one that introduced me to coaching. And so after working with her for a couple of months, I got into that business. And it was the absolute best move that I ever made. It was a perfect match for all the skills and experience and things that I just naturally do well. So that's how I got into it.
Now, isn't that interesting? So on one hand, you had an aha moment. On the other, you were wandering, and it all came together into a whole new opening for you that's turned into a fabulous business. Really, yes. Really cool. But you've specialized in something in particular, and that's in the area of leadership. Am I correct?
Yes, you are correct.
And that's one of those funny words because people don't want to be managers, they want to be leaders. And the next generation don't want bosses, they want coaches, all the words. But what does it really mean? And how do you really do it? I'm an anthropologist, so leaders need followers. And they're not very good if nobody follows them, but sometimes they're following the wrong leader. All of this is complexity of human society at its best. So tell us a little bit more about what you're seeing in leadership and what has to happen for the next generation to come along here.
Well, traditionally, leadership has been very much top down. You have a series of very experienced, authoritative figures at the top of an organization who set the pace and the direction for where that organization or that company is going to go. And then they kind of force the edict down through the organization that everybody kind of must follow.
This real hierarchy here, right?
Very, very hierarchical driven, okay? What I've noticed over probably the last 10 to 15 years, and it's actually speeding up now as we move forward, is that people don't necessarily want to follow folks like that. They might end up following them once they understand what they're all about and why they're doing them and how the individual benefits. But initially, they're not interested in that. They want people who are more personable, who are more supportive, who take the time to know them to the point where that employee says, wow, that person might be tough, but they care. They have my back. I can count on them to make sure that I do my best regardless of what's going on. And so with leadership changing like that, and with the people involved in those leadership roles, it's become a real dicey area for most organizations today.
So we have very strong, I worked with one, we do a lot of culture change work, as I mentioned to you, and we work with one organization where the CEO signed every check. A very large healthcare system with 2,500 employees and no empowerment and no collaboration or trust. It was now he had to turn it around. It was losing a lot of money, but it was very controlling, top down, and it was hard to build the trust for people. It was very interesting. So with this going on and the boomers having, they're slowly migrating out. They're retiring. Some are, some aren't. But now leadership is going to be changing. Is that what you're thinking?
Yes. And it's changing in a lot of ways that people in organizations aren't seeing. So as an example, for the last 30 some years, most organizations have been led, have been managed, have been owned by folks from my generation, the baby boom generation. And they came with a particular set of viewpoints about personal interaction, organizational structure, where the buck stops. Okay. So now those folks have been leaving the workforce nationally at the rate of 10,000 people a day. And that's going to continue for the next 10 to 12 years.
Wow.
And so, in fact, what's interesting, 2018 is actually a watershed year because for the first time, the millennial generation now occupies more seats in corporate America and in the entrepreneurial side of the country from a job standpoint than the baby boomers do. They've ellipsed us now. And so as they're moving into these entry level and mid-level, in some cases, if they're in technology, they might actually run the company. They're now bringing a completely different style of management and leadership and just a different viewpoint on what work means.
So now, as you're beginning to coach companies, how do you help them both appreciate this, balance it? I work with one very large company, and the boomers and the Gen Ys had a hard time talking to each other. They needed a translator. The Gen X's in the middle, the poor folks had a hard time going left and right, trying to figure out what did he say and what does he mean. What are you beginning, as you coach them, are you helping them begin to see the value in the collaboration across the generations? Or are the Gen Ys really a mythology? Are they myth or are they real?
No, actually, it's a very real phenomenon. And one of my core beliefs is that engagement equals ownership. So the more you can get people engaged in the conversation, in the viewpoint, the philosophy required going forward, the more they're likely to take ownership for whatever solution it looks like the best. So for most of my onboarding, my introductions with these companies, it's a matter of helping them see what many people probably within the organization are already seeing. It's not a fact that, oh, gee, this is coming. Well, this is here. You're already in it. And the question is, how deep are you in it? And what is it going to require to work your way out of it so that in some amount of time going forward, it will go from a very tumultuous, rocky situation to one that everybody, they have the same game plan. and they're all working together to smooth it out.
Oh, it feels like you're teaching them cricket and they don't have a clue what the game is.
Oh, yes. And I played that as a kid. I lived in England. And believe me, it was the oddest. I mean, it was a great game. It was a lot of fun, but it was trying to get Americans to understand that concept. Nah.
Well, it's a little bit like the transformation of industry today. Now, the last I saw, globally, the millennials will be 50% of the workforce this year or next year. It doesn't matter which year, but it is the way the workforce is going to become. And they've grown up digital. The Gen Zs are right behind them. The Gen Zs
Yes.
have an 8-second attention span, and they spend 3 hours on a computer for non-educational activities, and they love video games. That's their favorite pastime. And so there's a whole different world coming through, and they relate to leadership, ideas, and each other more like a soccer game than the kind of hierarchical top-down that it is today. How do you help them? How do you help the companies? Because if they don't adapt, they're going to find themselves without any employees. They're not going to want to work there.
Yes. And that's interesting because in some of the research that I've done on the millennial generation and kind of what they bring to the workplace, it's interesting because they are arguably the most educated folks arriving into the workplace. You know, the baby boomers are the most educated currently and experienced leaving. These folks are the most educated showing up, but they have a little bit of a deficit. They're probably the weakest in terms of general workplace and business acumen. And the interesting thing is, even though a lot of them don't let on, most of them actually know that. They recognize that their first legitimate job in a company is not 22 or 23 like it was in mine. For them, it's 29 and 30. And so they're showing up a little late to the game. They're loaded up with academia, but they don't understand the dynamics of most organizations and how to feel comfortable and confident working through that so they can display what they've brought to the playing field. And so that tends to retard their growth occupationally until they figure out what works and what they might have to let go of.
Yep.
The folks that are currently running the organization, they've got to make some changes. But the folks showing up also have to decide what they're going to adopt to be successful and what they might have to let go of.
And you know, it isn't just the folks who are coming into those businesses at 27 or 28. We had a great university as a client, and when we did the research among the employers, they said, you send your graduates with a lot of aptitude but not attitude. They don't know how to manage a program or a project. They don't know how to play in these collaborative teams. And one guy, when I was a keynote speaker at a Michigan College Alliance, and the talent asset guy from General Motors said, I need them to be collaborators, coordinators, creators, and can they code also, please? And I was laughing. Oh, and communicators would help as well. And he's saying this to college presidents. And so the whole system for high school and growing into people for this next business world is failing to provide them with the skills they need to come in and communicate, coordinate, collaborate, and create so that I can survive. Is that what you're seeing too?
Very much so. In fact, I think one of the biggest challenges of young folks moving into any kind of a people oversight role, whether it's an entry-level supervisor, whether it's a department manager, now they've moved from doing things themselves, which they're very adept at doing, to now seeing that other people work cohesively as a team to get those larger things done. And one of the principles in being able to do that effectively is getting confident at having all manner of conversations on a face-to-face basis, especially if you're in a workforce that's in the same location. And for you and I, this is second nature. But for these folks, for much of their life, communications has been separated by some device. So now they have to be able to put that device aside and figure out how to facilitate problem solving, how to have conversations with people about what they can bring to the party to help that person become better developmentally or in a particular challenge that they happen to be working on. So it's that whole face-to-face thing which tells people instantly, because I'm sure you've seen the research or actually practiced this about communication, voice being one, body language being the other, and so everybody comes equipped being able to read a conversation and say, gee, I know what he's saying, but I'm seeing different.
Yes, I do.
And you can't get that if you're trying to text message the whole day.
It's true. MIT had some interesting articles in Strategy Plus Business about the way their teams find solutions without any leadership, literally. A collaboration with trust and innovation, empowerment, and they each decide who has the best skills to do which without a top-down hierarchical leader in some fashion. Pretty interesting. So now for you, we talked about technology. How is it affecting leadership?
Technology is affecting leadership in a way, again, most people assume that, okay, it's device related. And I'm saying devices are part of everybody's environment today. That's the tool by which you connect to technology. The real thing that technology is doing, that's changing the workplace and changing organizations, it's the speed at which we can gather and evaluate data. And for most leaders today, and over the next 3 to 5 years and beyond, they're going to have to get very adept at being able to plug into data that's not, I'm not talking about Facebook data. I'm talking about data that actually gives you concrete understanding of what has worked, what has not worked, where things are moving, and be able to make decisions based on data as opposed to hip shooting, which in the environment I grew up, that was pretty prevalent. And it was prevalent because it was easy for people to do and they didn't get called on it if they made a mistake. There was no data backup to say, gee, it didn't work this way. And so now it's kind of like the rug's been pulled out from under everybody. And now you're going to know one way or another the decisions you make almost instantaneously, whether they're the right ones or not.
So, Steve, tell our listeners, with all the discussion about wanting to have face-to-face communication, how is technology affecting leadership? Particularly, as a global economy takes people virtual, this is going to be serious if I never see the face, unless I use Zoom like I'm using with you today. So What do you see happening with the technology and the leadership implications?
Well, to me, technology fulfills two primary areas. One, it's connectivity. And for folks like you and I, it enables us to be able to work with people virtually anywhere in the globe as long as you have a connection into that, that World Wide Web, that we can form that connection. But for most businesses, where technology is going to have a profound effect is in the ability to capture data, to be able to basically record and monitor everything that goes on in an organization, with the ability now of not us just running harder to figure out what to collect, but us being able to evaluate what's there. So many leaders today are not going to be able to do what they did when I was young and coming up in my industry, which was hip shoot a lot of times. They're now going to have plenty of data in front of them, hopefully organized in a way that they can use it to make data-based decisions. You're not going to have the luxury of making a decision that doesn't have good facts behind it to basically improve your batting average of more good decisions and less bad ones.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. One of the things, I have a client who gave me their millennials to work with. And I was just fascinated because they could text very easily, but they couldn't talk to a client. They didn't really know how to communicate with the partners. And we went off on a retreat. And their comments at the end of that 2 days was, my God, we learned more about each other in 2 days than in the 3 or 4 years we've worked together. And to some degree, it's not only how you change the leadership, but you're going to change the culture of the organization. Because the kind of, sit in your cubicle, do your job, collect your paycheck, isn't going to make it in the next world where they aren't going to have a lot of time to interact and get to know each other. But that's going to be an essential part of the culture of business tomorrow. And then there's going to be a virtual gig economy that ties into this. So some of the things that we're going to be doing is creating a community, that silly word, and gathering people together to talk to each other and get to know each other. I was just flabbergasted that it took a retreat for people to pause for a moment and get to know what they each did, more about their backgrounds as people, And in the absence of that, they were functional, but not terribly good at building an organization or knowing who they were building it with. So as we work on the consulting coaching intersection, we're watching that there's a change coming in not only what people are doing, how leaders are operating, but the environments in which they're actually taking place. Are there some success stories you might want to share that you can offer anonymously that might illustrate the way in which you work on this?
Yes, I worked with a gentleman who was about midway up in this e-commerce organization in a town here close to San Diego, California. They were a nationwide company, and they provided online driving, driver's license exams, registrations, licensing, all insurance, all manner of things for driving through the internet. And this gentleman here, his total department was responsible for ensuring that everything on their website was getting out there in front of the right clients. Okay, because everything was dependent on their website was their portal for their business. And he was very, very good at what he did. What he was struggling with was all the people that were reporting to him, and he was just having real difficulty managing them and getting them to be a part of the team, and him not feeling like he had to do all this stuff himself, which is typical for most people that are early in their years of management. And so we started a series of like games almost to get him comfortable with doing things differently. One of them involved delegation. The other one involved time management. This was great because he always felt like he had way too much to do than he had time to do it. So what we figured out during one call was whenever he was getting ready to go away on vacation, he seemed to be able to do a whole week's worth of work in a couple of days because he was excited about leaving. So, he really focused on getting all the right things done. So I told him, I said, okay, for the next couple of weeks, you're only going to work 3 days. By Wednesday, you will have everything done for the week. And Thursday and Friday, you decide whatever you want to do, but it can't be your regular work. And the first week was a real struggle. But after about 3 weeks of doing that, he said he was absolutely amazed at how not only was he getting things done, but over time he had less and less to do. And I said, well, why is that? He goes, well, because I'm finding other people to do it for me.
A little delegation is not abdication. And
right.
You have those people there to, in fact, collaborate with you on getting it done, don't you?
And you know what was funny? I asked him, I said, now when you're talking to your team, and they're obviously seeing a transformation taking place in you, what kind of feedback are you getting? And he said, well, that was probably the most eye-opening. He says, all of my folks are very talented, much more so than I gave them credit for. And to a person, the feedback was, well, it was about time. They're sitting there waiting for more responsibility. They're waiting for more projects that they can manage from front to end and just kind of keep him in the loop. And so when it finally showed up, they were incredibly happy, and he was just getting used to the change up.
How interesting. Well, there are doers, and then there are discoverers, and then there are deliverers, and there are different styles. But unless you have someone to help coach you through that, you really don't have a mirror to see what's going on.
Yes.
And so that's not, and the fact that he was a mid-level is very telling, because often we give coaches to the senior executives, and that's fine, but they can't do it without everyone else in the organization also changing. And you need a common thread or common voice. If not, everyone's got a different plan of how they're going to do this, and that creates wonderful chaos and not very effective cooperation. So my last thought is on communication, because I often find that we do things but don't talk about them and don't share them. Are you finding that there's a growing awareness that verbal communication and written is difficult, videos? What are people doing to build that leadership communication model here?
Well, when I am called in to work with someone, the thing that I focus most on is getting people comfortable having face-to-face, on-the-fly type communications that have some intention and some purpose to them. One of the things that is happening now in many companies, it's been there for a while, but it's getting a little bit of a slow start, and it falls under the heading of performance management. It's companies that are becoming much more fluid with the development, the assessment of their people. And instead of doing things once a year in the form of an annual review, there's some major league companies out there that have just completely scrapped that model. And they're now building these cultures where manager and an employee, or mentor and employee, or coach and employee, or trainer and employee, they have conversations ongoingly about what's working, what's not working, what they can do to make things better. And it's a tough transition to get into. But once people buy into the fact that it actually creates a more fluid, less problematic work environment, they're jumping into it big time. And the employees like it a lot because they've actually been looking for that all along.
I know. It's also an essential part of the way we grow. There's a wonderful research coming out about our evolution and the power of that culture and communication. Because what you're now doing is not holding back all that wisdom, it's sharing it.
Right.
And then we can see how you apply it. And then we can coach each other, tell stories about what's working, but help each other. That's the way we have grown. And that creates a far better person than the kind of once a year, I'll tell you how you did, give you a salary. That's not the way it works. The brain is looking for feedback. And the fellow who changed his work style, oh my, how brilliant that is, because it just was actionable and it worked, didn't it? Isn't that exciting?
Well, to most employees in an organization, when they work for someone that has that more free-flowing exchange of ideas and sharing knowledge and giving them just enough to make them feel like they understand it and they can run with it, they walk away feeling like, wow, this person knows me. They care about my success here. They want to help me become successful as opposed to waiting for me to step in a hole so they can tell me about it.
Oh, I love it. Steve, I think we've given our listeners more than enough for them to begin to think about where they are and how they are going to grow, and the value of a mentor or a coach, or continually talking to each other about problems and solutions and learning from each other, observing each other. I have one colleague, and he has all of his workers working in pairs with no managers at all. And the pairs change every 2 or 3 weeks, so nobody ever gets stale. But the idea is that by pairing up, you can help each other grow up. And it becomes a very viable way of running the business. So for those who are listening, if they'd like to know more about Steve Smith, can you tell them how they could reach you?
Yes. The best way to be able to reach me is to go to my website, which is growthsourcecoaching.com. My office phone number is there. My email address is there. They can contact me any way that's comfortable for them. But the reason I have them go there first, because one of the things I've learned in the 10 years I've been doing this is most of the time, before people are comfortable reaching out to someone that does what I do, they really want to know who I am and why I do this.
Yep.
And that website will tell them that. And then if they're saying, okay, this is the person I want to meet, then I've spent 30, 45 minutes with people on the phone, just basically trying to figure out what is they really want out of a coaching relationship. Because not everybody wants the same thing. And some people, what they want, coaching isn't going to give them.
Yep.
So I try to give them as much of my wisdom as I can to let them decide whether this is going to be a healthy thing for them. And then if it is, then we move from there. I
also will tell you he has a great video, and it talks very candidly about the difference between coach and consulting. And they are different flavors, and you need to know what it is you're really looking for, both personally and for your business. So it's GrowthSource Coaching. And I urge you to get a hold of Steve Smith if you think there's something that we've talked about today that could really add value to you and to your organization. Thanks for joining us today. And it's been so much fun to share another On the Brink podcast. Remember, our job is to help you soar. And if you're on the brink, you can learn more about what we do at SimonAssociates.net or AndySimon.com, which is where you can find more about our book, On the Brink, A Fresh Lens to Take Your Business to New Heights. And I love doing Ask Andy, so send me your questions at info@AndySimon.com, and we'll try and answer them in our very frequent Ask Andy sessions. It's been so much fun today. I wish you a great day, and thanks for joining us. Bye-bye now, and bye to Steve Smith.